As I'm hoping you're getting used to now, before you start working through a section, this is a good place to look at. It helps to know what you're going to see before you see it. If you're going to go see a movie and somebody tells you, this is a movie about a guy and he loses his job and then he this and this, and if you know the whole storyline, you're going to get more out of the movie as you watch the movie. If somebody just says, hey, let's go see a movie, what's it about? I have no idea what the story's about. Then you don't get as much out of it. Because your mind can make predictions and say, oh, I see, wait a sec, this happens now. Maybe that means that this is going to happen, after it goes over there and things. If you read what you're supposed to learn in a section before you go through it, it's going to be far more effective working through that. You have worked with percents before. This is the assumption I'm making here, right? That you've worked with percents before and you understand what percentages are. What this what this section does for grade 8 is you're focusing on percents that are less than 1%, little tiny percent, and percentages that are greater than 100. Because when you first learn percents, both of those are difficult. And then, along with that, percents involving fractions. Okay? A good enough place to start here is with what they have, which is product labels. You probably can't see that, but if you look on here, there are some percentages over at the right here. What are those percentages on product labels? I have a box of granola bars here. It says something, it's hard to even know what it is. Oh, especially when you're reading it in French. Percent DV, percentage of daily value, like how much is recommended you have, right? So these granola bars say sugars, 13 grams. They don't give you a recommended daily intake of sugar. They don't say, we recommend you have 100 grams of sugar a day, right? They recommend the other things, protein, carbohydrate, and all that stuff. Percentages of a certain amount. If it's hard to see on here, but if this says 7%, it's recommended 7% of your recommended daily value of something. That is 7 out of 100. All right. Percent, probably you learn to represent percents like this with 100 grid. Percent just means out of 100. That's all it means. It means representing something out of 100, even if the actual total isn't out of 100. When you guys get a mark on a test or something like that, usually the first thing you do is change it to a percent. Why is it helpful to change something to a percent? Why is it helpful? It's quicker to work with that number. Yeah, it's quicker to use because you're more. What were you going to say? So it's easier to compare it to something like percents usually you use because in your mind you have a reference of what that is, right? 50%'s this much, 75's this much, 100's this. Whereas if somebody says you got something out of 37 and we got 24, it's harder to work within your brain because you're not used to working with 37, but you're very used to working with 10 and 100 and stuff like that. So it's a lot easier, quicker, more convenient, and allows you to compare things. If you had two things that were out of different amounts, this thing's out of 37, this thing's out of 62, and you wanted to compare them, what you can do is change them both to percentages and work from there. Percent means out of 100. On this 100 grid here, you have 65 squares shaded. That's what 65% means. 65% is a way of representing this quantity. If we wanted to represent it as a decimal, if this represented 1, this whole grid represents 100%, or it represents 1, like one whole grid, we could say that the amount shaded is 65%, or we could say it's 0.65 of the grid. A lot of times in everyday things, like if you're a sports fan, a lot of percentages that they give in sports, like save percentage for a goaltender in hockey, save percent, they usually say 0.895 or something like that. .895 means, what percentage is that the same as? If we had to shade that much here, so if I shaded 0.895 of this, how much am I shading if I'm shading 0.895? There's 70, there's 80. How much do I have to shade? There's 89. If I wanted to do 0.895, how much do I shade? If I shade that whole square, it's how much now? What percent is that? 90, right? I don't want to shade that. That's 89. How much do I have to do if I want 895 here? Yeah, a half of another square here, right? There's half of another square. So there's 89 squares and a half of another square. 0.895, it starts to become hard when you have decimals and percentages that involve a fraction of 1%, but that's one of the things we're looking at here. 0.895 would be 89.5%. You can have a half a percent or a part of a percent. 0.89 would be 89%. 0.90 would be 90%. Halfway in between there, 895 would be 89.5%. It's hard for some people to work with the decimals, but what I would recommend is think of an extra 0 on the end there, because I think that helps people. 9.90 is like 0.900. 0.895, 0.890, this one's halfway in between there. But we're going to get to decimals as we go here. At first, we're just going to be representing these. And this is just telling you how can you represent things on a grid. I'm hoping that most of us are okay with representing 100% in a grid is the whole grid, right? If we said fill up this room with cement, it's the whole room is full, right? If we say fill up the grid 100%, there it is, right? The whole grid is filled up. If we want to do 130% of something, you know how sports, here's another sports analogy. For percent, I seem to use sports analogies. In sports, reporters ask questions. What do you think? How are you going to win the game today or whatever? They have cliche answers always. Do you know what a cliche is? It's a statement that people say so, like that you hear so often that, oh, that's just a cliche. It means it's a statement that's said so often you hear it, right? Oh, we're going to give it 110%. Well, we're going to take it one game at a time. Well, we're going to, those kind of statements. Sports athletes always seem to respond to questions like that. Can you give something 110%? What is 110%? If I say you can have 100% of all the granola bars in this box, how many are you getting? Inevitably, I seem to end up using food before lunch rather than after, but how many are you getting if I say you can have 100% of the granola bars in this box? All of them, right? There's not 5 right now, but all of them, right? If I said you can have 130% of the granola bars in a box, how many are you getting? Let's say there was a box that had 10 granola bars. Actually, let's say it was an enormous box. It's a case. It's got 100 granola bars in it. And I say you can have 100% of those granola bars. You get how many? You get 100. If I say you can have 130% of those granola bars, how many do you get?
100 in the box.
Well, if I word it differently, if I say I have lots of boxes of them. I have all kinds of cases here, right? And if I say you can have 130% of how many granola bars are in one box, what does that mean? How many do you get? Yeah, you get all of the ones in one box and you get 30 more, right? When you have percentages that are higher than 100, it's more than what you started with. Okay? This is perhaps the greatest teaching aid for this thing. Now I'm going to have to stop the video here. It's empty before you get all excited. Okay? It's empty. Just for the record, for anybody who's watching it on YouTube here, it's an empty Pringles can.